You compared Donald Trump to a third world dictator yesterday in an interview with the New York Times. How so?
Well, I don't know about a dictator. I said a third world strongman. You know, he's running for president, so no matter what, he won't be a dictator unless our republic completely crumbles, which I don't anticipate it will. But yeah, here's what happens in many countries around the world. You have a leader that emerges and basically says, don't put your faith in yourselves, don't put your faith in society, put your faith in me. I'm a strong leader, and I'm going to make things better all by myself. This is very typical. You see it in the third world. You see it a lot in Latin America for decades. It's basically the argument he's making that he single-handedly is going to turn the country around. We've never been that kind of country. We have a president. The president is an American citizen who serves for a period of time, constrained by the constitutions and the powers vested in that office. The president works for the people, not the people for the president. And if you listen to the way he describes himself and what he's going to do, he's going to single-handedly do this and do that without regard for whether it's legal or not. Look, I think people are going to have to make up their mind. I can tell you this, no matter what happens in this election, for years to come, there are many people on the right, in the media, and voters at large that are going to be having to explain and justify how they fell into this trap of supporting Donald Trump, because this is not going to end well one way or the other. No way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement, and Donald Trump is a con artist.
Donald Trump is a con artist.
He's a con man. I think it's time to unmask him for what he is. A con man who's taking advantage of people's fears and anxieties about the future, portraying himself as some sort of strong guy. He's not a strong guy.
He doesn't sweat. He doesn't sweat because his pores are clogged from the spray tan that he uses.
You all have friends that are thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Friends, do not let friends vote for con artists.
We're about to turn over the conservative movement to a person that has no ideas of any substance on the important issues, the nuclear codes of the United States, to an erratic individual.
So we cannot allow the conservative movement to be taken over by a con artist.
How can the nominee of the Republican Party, of the party of Lincoln, the party of Reagan, the party of hope, and the party of optimism nominate someone who refuses to criticize the Ku Klux Klan or distance himself from an avowed racist like David Duke?
The party of Lincoln and Reagan and the presidency of the United States will never be held by a con artist. Guys, we have a con artist as the front runner in the Republican Party. A guy who has made a career out of telling people lies.
He's always calling me Little Marco. And I don't think that he's taller than me. He's like 6'2", which is why I don't understand why his hands are the size of someone who's 5'2". Have you seen his hands? They're like this. And you know what they say about men with small hands? You can't trust them. You can't trust them.
When the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, Ukraine was left with the world's third largest stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons on the planet. But they signed this agreement with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that basically said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we, these three countries that signed to this, will provide for your defense and assure you of your defense. And so Ukraine did that. They gave up these weapons. Well, now, this was signed in 1994, 20 years later, one of the three countries that signed that agreement hasn't just not provided for their defense, they actually invaded them. And I want to make a point on this for a second. Think about if you're one of these other countries around the world right now that feels threatened by your neighbors. And the United States and the rest of the world are going to you and saying, listen, don't develop nuclear weapons. Don't develop nuclear weapons, South Korea. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Japan. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia. We will protect you. We will watch out for you. What kind of lesson do you think this a con artist is about to take over the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and we have to put a stop to it? Has a record of sticking it to working people for 35 years. So we're going to put a stop to it now. There is no way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement. There are many people on the right, in the media, voters at large that are going to be having to explain and justify how they fell into this trap of supporting Donald Trump, because this is not going to end well one way or the other. I work for Donald J. Trump, the new president of the United States, the 47th president, who has a clear mandate.
Donald Trump, a con artist, will never get control of this party.
To reorient our foreign policy to one that once again puts America and our interests at the center. Donald Trump is a con artist, and that's what I'm going to focus on, 100%.
Let me tell you something. I will never quit. I will never stop until we keep a con man from taking over the party of Reagan and the conservative movement. He's a con man. He's a con man. He's a con man. I'll tell you why. Number one, look, people are angry and frustrated and scared about the future. Okay? People are working harder than they've ever worked in their lives, and they're running in place. And he swoops in and is taking advantage of that. He's taking advantage of that. He's telling people, I'm going to fight for the little guy. I'm fighting for the working class. Here's what he doesn't tell them. He has spent a career in business, 50 years, sticking it to the little guy. Sticking it to the little guy. When his companies went bankrupt, the first people that didn't get paid were the subcontractors, the plumbers and the pipe fitters and the people that laid bricks and all those people that worked for a living. They didn't get paid. He got his money. They didn't get theirs. He's going around telling people, oh, I'm fighting to keep other countries from taking our jobs. What is he talking about? You ever bought a Trump tie? If you buy a Trump tie, you're not just getting a tacky tie. You're buying a tie made in China or in Mexico. He portrays himself as the strongest guy on illegal immigration. That's fine, but Trump Tower was built by illegal immigrants from Poland, who he paid $4 an hour, 12 hours a day. Okay, a judge found that he was involved in a conspiracy to defraud these workers of their pay. Even now in Florida, he has a hotel or something down there. And 300 Americans have applied for jobs at that hotel. All of them got turned down. Instead, he brings workers from other countries. He acts like he's some sort of tough guy. He's not a tough guy. This is the first guy that asked for Secret Service protection. First guy. The other day, he told the protester, I wish I could punch you in the face. Donald Trump has never punched anyone in the face, okay?
Secretary Nuland, in your statement, you outline our goal as threefold. First, we want peace, then political normalization, and then ultimately the return to borders, which I imagine includes Crimea as well. The question that I have is how realistic, and the hope is that Minsk would offer that promise, with peace coming first as the precondition for all these things to be possible. The question that I have is how realistic is that goal, given the goals that Putin has himself? I think the goal, and unless any of you dispute this, I think the goal Putin has here is to basically, it's not just about Ukraine, it's about completely reorganizing the post-Cold War, post-Soviet era order in Europe. And it's not just about Ukraine. And in that context, that's why he wants to weaken and divide and perhaps even force NATO to fall apart. In fact, he's questioned why we even need a NATO anymore since there's no more Soviet Union. As part of furthering that goal, he's openly said that they believe they need to establish a sphere of influence, and not just throughout the former Soviet space, but also in former Warsaw Pact type countries. This whole talk about protecting Russian speakers, this is just an excuse that he puts out there as a justification before the international community for moving forward. But ultimately, their ultimate goal here is to carve out, to reorder the post-Soviet order in the region, and to carve out for Russia a strategic space that for themselves of influence. And so in light of that, why should we have any hope that these ceasefires are actually going to hold, given we know what his ultimate goal is? Now, he may agree to a temporary ceasefire as a tactical move, maybe hopefully to split us off from the Europeans, in essence, hoping for us, and maybe that's why there's been arguments that we shouldn't go on sanctions alone, because it could cause a friction with the European Union and split us from them. In that regard, but at the end of the day, he may agree to a ceasefire temporarily, either to consolidate gains they've already made, or to perhaps try to create a point of friction between, hoping that we'll jump out ahead of the Europeans and create that as a division. But ultimately, his goal, unquestionably, is to completely rearrange the order in this area and carve out for Russia a sphere of influence. So how is it even realistic, given knowing that about him, to think that he's ever going to allow stabilization to return to Ukraine and that he's ever going to return back to their borders, given we know what their goal is? I mean, he's a criminal and a thug, but he's also a very determined one who has shown the willingness to act out in furtherance of a strategic goal. So why should I feel optimistic that there's any chance of that happening, given the goal he has now, unless the cost-benefit analysis changes for him?